Okay, Father Morby will lead us in the invocation.
Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life, Christos voskreseis mērķis, nebijus nekopnā, Isus imogaveci vondarapa. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Deacon Ealy will now lead us in the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
If you'd now join us in the saying and reading of the Pledge Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In your program today, you have a sheet of paper that talks about in Flanders Field and the history behind the writing of Flanders Field and the history of the poppies. So sometime later today, you might want to take the opportunity to read that document. I found it rather interesting myself. But today, Seth Parlow will do the reading in Flanders Field for us.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, the poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Thank you, Seth. If we could now sing God Bless America.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Skip Ryder will now place the wreath.
On behalf of a grateful nation and a grateful and loving parish, I will place the wreath in memory of the 14 men of St. Mary's Parish who gave their ultimate sacrifice for God and their country. In another poem of John McCrae, Lieutenant Colonel, Canadian Army, it's entitled The Anxious Dead. And in that poem, he talks about how the men who died in battle never got to know how the day went. We do know how the day went, and we are forever grateful to those men and women who served to preserve our freedom and our liberty. It is our day of remembrance, and we must never forget their sacrifice.
Thank you, Skip. Today we're honored to have Todd Pilasinski as our guest speaker. Todd is currently a pilot for Delta Airlines, but his background goes much deeper than that. In 1982, he was a member of the Air Force ROTC, looking for a slot in the pilot training program. In 1983, he did make that training program, and he became a cargo airplane pilot. And from there, he became an instructor. And then to his present-day job as a pilot of Delta Airlines. Todd is also a past president of St. Mary's Orthodox Cathedral, and as you can see, he's also a member of the men's choir. Todd's here today to speak about the meaning of Memorial Day and why Memorial Day should and is so important to us.
I want to thank St. Mary's Veterans Association, particularly Skip Ryder, for the opportunity to say a few words today concerning Memorial Day this year. While I feel underqualified to say anything of great importance as a veteran, the topic means quite a lot to me personally. In addition, while I usually have little fear in stating my opinions in public, as much of you know, I have to admit I'm a little intimidated standing here in front of our clergy, particularly Father Andrew, who makes saying something meaningful in 10 minutes look rather easy, and it's really not. In any event, as I thought about what I wanted to say concerning Memorial Day this year, a number of things rolled through my mind. And as some of you know, I have a keen interest in the Civil War and in Abraham Lincoln in particular. And as I thought about my topic today, I couldn't help but be drawn in a large part to Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Well, I will get to some of his comments a little bit later. What initially strikes me about Lincoln's address is how he combined meaning with brevity. Lincoln wrote the address on his way to Gettysburg on the train. He labored intensely over each word to craft what I consider the greatest speech in American history. And it only lasts about 2 minutes when you speak at a normal rate. That's just amazing to me. One of the funny sidelights to the story of the address is that while there was a photographer there was never really a meaningful picture taken of Lincoln giving the address, because at the time it was not unusual for speakers at those occasions to speak for easily 1 to 2 hours. So the photographer thought he had plenty of time to get all warmed up and get the picture, and by the time he got his lens cap off the camera, Lincoln was done. So I can't promise my remarks will only last 2 minutes, but I do promise I won't be 1 to 2 hours. As I thought about why I think Memorial Day is so important, one thought kept repeating itself in my mind. And that thought is that any nation that forgets those who have served it loses part of its soul, a critical part, I think. The statement of American independence in 1776 was wonderful, but it had to be backed up by men and women who were willing to gamble all that they had to make it happen. And by everything, I mean most especially their lives. But because of this commitment, a cost was created to be borne by each of us as we accept the prize of freedom, and that is to remember those who made it possible. Each subsequent war or conflict has created the same cost for those who accept the prize of freedom. We must acknowledge those who paid the price of freedom. From the Revolution, the Civil War, the World Wars, and now through Afghanistan, the price of freedom has been paid by those we honor today. As Lincoln said at Gettysburg, it is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That is the individual cost for each of us for the prize of freedom. This is why I think our remembrance of those who served is so important. Our national soul is literally at stake if we forget them. There's a scene in the movie Patton that I really like, where General Patton is speaking with his junior officers by the graves of some Americans that were just recently killed in a battle in North Africa. He tells his officers to put armed guards to watch over the hallowed ground, stating, "Our graves are not going to disappear like everyone else's who fought here." General Patton knew the value of honoring the fallen. So what happens when we forget to honor those who served? For those from my generation and older, we distinctly remember the agony that the war in Vietnam caused during the 60s and early 70s. While I'm not here to argue the rightness or wrongness of the politics at the time, one of the fallouts to the unpopularity of the war was the feeling of disgust directed at those who served in the military by many segments of our society. Our nation had a sort of spiritual malaise that lasted for nearly 20 years, where anything attached to the military was just scorned. At the time, I remember walking down University Avenue at the U of M campus, and again, this is the late 70s. I was a brand new Air Force ROTC cadet with my uniform on. As I walked down the street, I was heckled by some guys in the frat at the U, and it was just a carryover of that time where people just treated the military really with a gross lack of respect. Just something you don't see anymore today, but it did happen. One of the consequences of falling into that trap of not honoring those who served. With this loss of our spiritual center, our country was floundering for a while. And for those who are younger, I think the opening scenes in the movie Miracle about the Olympic hockey team in 1980, if you watch the beginning of that movie, it kind of says and shows you in 1 or 2 minutes how the malaise in the country just was really in a downward spiral. Fortunately, our country has regained our love for those who serve, but we must remain ever vigilant to keep it. I had the honor of visiting my Uncle Frank Lieba's grave at Arlington Cemetery in Epinal, France, about 10 years ago with my wife. Frank is one of those on the flagpole there that was killed in World War II. For those of you not familiar with the cemeteries over there, they are run by a group or an organization called the American Battlefield Monuments Commission. You can Google that when you get home today if you want a good view of some cemeteries and how our guys are taken care of over there. It's really, really worth your while, I think. If you've never had the chance to visit one of these cemeteries, I highly encourage you to make the time to visit these hallowed grounds. Next time you're visiting Europe or somewhere in the Pacific Rim, there's a number of the cemeteries over in the Philippines too. Their upkeep is provided by the U.S. government, that's you, and they are staffed by retired U.S. servicemen who now reside in those countries, and they're absolutely pristine. I know most of you, or a lot of you, have probably been to Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, and these cemeteries are on a par, and I actually think even more beautiful than that. So take the time to go there and visit them if you're ever over there. While many things were meaningful to me in my visit while I was at Ethanol, there was one thing that really stood out, however. As my wife and I toured the area, one of the gentlemen that works at the cemetery, working as a guide, mentioned how committed the French were to these cemeteries, which I guess surprised me a little bit because sometimes the French don't get the best reputation for us as far as how they treat us and whatnot over here. He said that during the French Memorial Day, that cemetery becomes the center of Eastern France. The children there are taught from a very young age to honor the Americans who sacrificed themselves for their freedom. Each Memorial Day, these children line the graves with American and French flags. They have been taught the cost of their prize of freedom. As I close today, I ask, should we really ask anything less of our children or ourselves? The importance of recognizing those who have made the ultimate sacrifice only ensures our own spiritual well-being as a nation. Did you enjoy the holiday weekend? Never forget your own prize of freedom by remembering those who paid the price of freedom. Thank you very much and have a happy Memorial Day.
Thank you, Todd. And now the St. Mary's Ritual Honor Guard.
disgrace, grim death with cold grave. And thankfully your life you give. Your glory lives beyond the
And an expression of appreciation from the president of our cathedral, Michael Kokish.
I viewed a rather patriotic video that showed a grandfather and his two grandsons getting into a car. As Grandpa turned on the radio, a newscaster announced that 3 teens were arrested just the night before for defacing a war memorial which included painting messages on it against the military and the war in the Middle East. Now, neither of the two grandsons appeared concerned or even interested, as they both had their earbuds in, listening to music. The grandfather, however, was unmistakably disturbed. One of the grandsons asked him if something was wrong. Grandfather stated, "Some people sure have short memories, and those that are too young to know need to be taught." The kids had no idea what Grandpa was talking about. The grandfather said, "Come on, I want to show you guys something." He took them to a nearly empty movie theater that had a few veterans inside, with some of their family members, viewing snippets of World War II newsreels, starting with President Roosevelt announcing the attack on Pearl Harbor. The newsreels then moved into the voice of President Reagan, narrating further footage of how 225 Rangers jumped off landing craft and took to the cliffs at Normandy. After 2 days of fighting, only 90 of those men could still bear arms. These were the champions who helped free a continent. These were the heroes who helped end a war. These were the men who, in their lives, fought for life and left the vivid heirs signed with their honor. The two grandsons by now had removed their earbuds and were suddenly immersed in what they were witnessing in the newsreels, realizing what these brave soldiers fought and sacrificed their lives for. They defied gravity from the skies above, lived in the belly of iron monsters, became worms in the mud of trenches, for dignity, for honor, for righteousness' sake, for God and country. They fought for you. I wish to thank our MC, George Zerbe, our entire Veterans Association. A special thank you to our guest speaker, Todd Belazinski, and mostly a thank you to all of you veterans. It is because of you that we can enjoy a day like this, basking in the very freedom you fought for. And then after this, everybody's invited over to the Parish Center for a nice luncheon, so I hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Last year, I started reading some history, and I read the biography of Martin Kostick. Today, I would like to read the biography of Stephen Sod. If you just give me a minute, I need to adjust this microphone here. On December 8th, 1941, the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, began a speech to the joint members of Congress with these words: "Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by the naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. This surprise attack propelled our nation into World War II. Before the war ended on September 2nd, 1945, over 16 million men and women would serve our armed services, and 409 of them were St. Mary's parishioners. Of the 291,557 Americans that would die in this war, 9 were members of St. Mary's. Stephen Sod was one of those 9 members of St. Mary's that passed away during the war. Stephen entered the Army Air Corps on March 4th, 1941, prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He was the son of John and Anna Sod and grew up at 1908 4th Street. Steve came from a big family. He had 4 brothers, Bill, Joe, John, and Mike, and 7 sisters: Olga, Ann, Helen, Mary, Martha, Margaret, and Irene. During the war, Mrs. Sod proudly displayed her service window flag of 4 stars, each star indicating the number of sons serving the country. So she had 4 sons that were in World War II at that time serving on our behalf. In June, Steve was assigned to a squadron in Clark Field in Pampanga, the Philippines. His primary assignment was an aerial photographer, but he is also trained as a machine gunner. When the war began, he is the first photographer in the Philippines to fly a wartime photo mission. The Japanese invaded the Philippines on December 10th, 1941. Eventually, American forces would be forced to withdraw from Manila and to the Bataan Peninsula and then to Corregidor Island. Bataan fell to fell to the Japanese, and our forces were taken prisoners of war. Steve was captured on the Bataan Peninsula and was part of the Bataan Death March that lasted 9 days. That march was 95 miles, and it was in 110-degree heat, and our soldiers were provided with little food or water. Those who could not keep up were simply bayoneted, as that was the ideology of the Japanese at that point in time. They viewed anyone who would surrender with contempt and disgust. After World War II, we would discover that the death rate of our POWs at the hands of the Japanese was 37%, compared to 1.1% at the hands of the Germans. Steve was moved initially after capture to a POW camp named Camp O'Donnell, and on June 6, 1942, to the POW camp at Cabanatuan. Steve, from the march, was already weakened, and on top of that, our prisoners of war suffered cruel and inhumane treatment. Steve Sod would die on July 23, 1942, after contracting malaria and from malnutrition. He was only 22 years old. His family would not receive official notification of the death until April 7, 1945, a full 3 years after he passed away. Steve was posthumously awarded the American Defense Service Medal with 1 Bronze Star, the Distinguished Unit Ribbon with 2 bronze oak leaf clusters, the World War II Victory Medal, and the Asiatic Pacific Theater Medal with 1 Bronze Service Star for participation in the Philippine Island Campaign, and lastly, the Philippine Defense Medal with 1 Bronze Service Star. As Todd was mentioning earlier in his speech, this is an example of why we cannot forget the past and why we have to be so thankful for the men and women that have served our country and given us the freedoms that we have today. I see out in our membership several of Steve's sisters, and I want to thank you personally, and I think this group here today wants to thank you personally for the sacrifice that your families made on our behalf. Thank you very much. As was mentioned earlier, we have 14 veterans that were killed in the line of duty, and we'd like to recognize and honor them today. In World War I, John Loss. In World War II, Stephen Sod. Joe Kokish. Stephen Kovalitsky. Carl Izak, John Rushatar, Martin Kostic, Lawrence Maniloff, Frank Liba, Harry Super. And from the Korean conflict, George Svek, Andrew Harilla, and William Warhol. And in the Vietnamese conflict, George Kokish. For all 14 of the service members at our cathedral and their families have lost, may their memory be eternal.
Grant rest eternal and blessed repose, O Lord, to the souls of thy departed servants, John, Stephen, Joseph, Stephen, Carl, John, Martin, Lawrence, Frank, Harry, George, Andrew, William, and George, together with all our departed veterans and those who lie at rest in this cemetery, and make their memory to be eternal. Give them rest and number them among the just, and have mercy upon us, for he alone is good and the lover of mankind.
That concludes our program for the day, but let me just finalize the program by saying please spend some time today and every day reflecting on and praying for those who are currently in harm's way and who have, in fact, given their lives for the freedoms that we do have today. There is, as was mentioned previously, a luncheon at the cathedral. You're all welcome to attend. We'd love to see you there. Have a good day.